All right, today we're jumping into one of the biggest and maybe the most personal questions we can possibly ask. It's the mystery that's happening inside your own head right this very second. Where does your consciousness actually come from?
I mean, it sounds like such a simple question, right? But it's a question that has completely stumped the greatest scientists, philosophers, and thinkers for literally centuries. Where does this rich inner world of thoughts and feelings and experiences, where does it all begin?
And this quote from Sam Harris, man, it just cuts right to the heart of the problem. Neuroscientists can stick you in an fMRI machine and watch your brain light up. They can see the exact neurons firing when you feel joy or when you see the color red. They can see the correlation, but that data doesn't explain the experience itself. You know? It tells us what's happening in the brain, but it doesn't tell us why it feels like anything to be you.
Okay, so let's dive into the most widely accepted scientific view. This perspective treats consciousness not really as a thing, but more as a property that just appears when things get incredibly complex. It's a concept called emergence. The classic way to get your head around emergence is to think about water. A single H2O molecule all by itself isn't wet. It isn't liquid. It doesn't have any of the properties we think of as water. But you get trillions of them together, and suddenly their interactions create a brand new property. Liquidity. The quality of wetness emerges from the complexity of the whole system.
So, applying that idea to the brain, the leading theory kind of goes like this. You start with simple, non-conscious particles. You arrange those particles into neurons, which are basically tiny information processors. Then, and this is the wild part, you connect somewhere between 80 to 100 billion of those neurons into a network that's more complex than the entire global internet. And out of that staggering, mind-boggling complexity, a new property emerges, subjective experience, your consciousness. Now, some theories say that to really get this, we have to go even smaller, like down to the quantum level. The idea here is that maybe the weird, fuzzy nature of quantum mechanics, specifically something called entanglement, that's happening inside the tiny little structures of our neurons, might just be the fundamental spark that kicks off our conscious reality. It's a frontier idea for sure. But, you know, as elegant and neat as the idea of emergence is, it runs smack into a massive philosophical wall. A wall so famous, it actually has its own name.
Welcome to the hard problem. See, the easy problems are things like, how does the brain process information from your eyes? Or how does it control your arm's movement? Science is actually getting pretty good at those. The hard problem is, why does all that mechanical processing feel like anything from the inside? Why do you have this inner movie playing in your head right now? This slide just lays the problem out so clearly. On the left, you've got everything science can measure from the outside, electrical signals, blood flow, firing patterns. And on the right, you have what you actually live through. We know they're connected. When you feel sad, certain things happen in your brain. But nobody, and I mean nobody, can explain how a bunch of electrical signals literally become the rich, personal, subjective experience of sadness.
And that's the core dilemma, isn't it? It's kind of like describing every single brick, wire, and pipe in a house in perfect, painstaking detail, and then expecting that description to somehow explain the feeling of being home. It just feels like we're missing a fundamental piece of the puzzle. And this is where a completely different perspective comes in, one that doesn't even try to solve the hard problem, but instead suggests, what if we're asking the question completely backward? This idea, it just flips the entire script. What if consciousness isn't some tiny localized spark that's produced by our brain? What if it's something vast and fundamental, and we are just a small part of it?
So in this view, consciousness is the ultimate reality. It's the field, the canvas on which everything else happens. The universe, space, time, our bodies, our brains. The brain isn't a factory that creates consciousness. It's more like an antenna or a filter that receives and tunes into a consciousness that's already everywhere.
So to put it simply, this view argues that instead of our brain building awareness from non-conscious stuff, a universal awareness is actually filtering itself down into our individual experience. The real mystery, then, isn't how matter creates mind, but how a universal mind creates the illusion that we're all separate little bits of matter. Okay, so we've been way out there exploring these huge mind-bending theories, but whether consciousness emerges from the brain or is filtered from the universe, we still have to live with it every day. So let's bring this all back down to earth and look at a really practical model of how these layers of consciousness work inside each and every one of us.
And look, understanding this stuff is absolutely critical. Because if you want to lead a team, or sell a product, or even just understand your own decisions better, you have to realize you're not dealing with one single logical mind. You're communicating with a consciousness that has multiple and often conflicting layers.
So, think of your consciousness as having 3 layers, each tied to a different part of the brain. Right on the surface is your rational mind, your reason. That's your neocortex. But just below that, you've got emotion, based in the limbic system. And then, at the very core, the deepest layer, is pure instinct. This is driven by the most primitive part of our brain, the part that's focused on survival.
And this right here is the key takeaway for anyone trying to connect with another person. You can present the most logical, rational argument in the world, but if their emotional brain or their instinctual brain feels fear or distrust or just isn't interested, you've already lost. True motivation, what really gets people to act, doesn't come from logic. It ignites in those deeper, nonverbal, often unspoken layers. So I'll leave you with this final thought. In your next conversation, your next meeting, or maybe even in that next little debate you have with yourself, just stop and ask, am I just talking to the logical surface, or am I actually connecting with the deeper currents of consciousness that are truly running the show? The answer? Well, it might just change everything.
Health is the most precious gift. If this video helped you or someone you love, please like, subscribe, and share so more families can stay safe and healthy.